Coming to you from the Hudson Media Group studio, this is Talking Politics, and I am the Professor Fernando Uribe. Hope you all had a wonderful week. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get started. Here's what I'm thinking about right now. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to provide a memory refresher for a lot of you. And I'm here to do what the Star Ledger and NJTV are incapable of doing. And that's indeed refreshing your memory, because God knows neither of the aforementioned media institutions are actually doing their jobs. As a result, it's you, the viewing public and consumers and readers alike, that are being done an incredible disservice. So I've really enjoyed seeing on my news feeds in recent weeks a lot of people demonstrating their usual keyboard courage, right, when it comes to the selective moral outrage that has become so almost commonplace, right, on a lot of our social media platforms. And I'm concerned because I think many on my news feed, perhaps should start investing in, memory enhancers, over-the-counter type of medication or over-the-counter supplements, which, folks, trust me, they do work. And for a lot of you that maybe are struggling with memory, guess what? I'm here to give you a good refresher of why so many on our social media platforms seem to be oblivious and even downright selective when it comes to how they consume the news and, quite frankly, what pisses them off. And a lot of you, especially my friends on the left, need this refresher. So let me take you back in time a little bit, all right? Remember 10 years ago, in 2011, when tens of thousands of either Democrats or liberals or progressives, occupied the Wisconsin state capitol in Madison and physically occupied it for more than 2 weeks, But remember, we were told, though, quote, this is what democracy looks like. Or, for example, remember in 2016 when then President Obama for example, was sort of encouraging hundreds of BLM activists to block interstate highways. And many of them resulted in being, violent and, of course, subsequently accosting and, in some instances, like in the city of Dallas, Texas, killing police officers. But we were told, quote, to assign the actions of one person to an entire movement is dangerous and irresponsible. Or, for example, remember in the fall of 2018 during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, when a mob of liberals and Democrats and progressives stormed the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court, right? And they were pounding their fists in the air and they were screaming to the heavens, but we were told, quote, it's understandable. Or remember, for example, this past summer, where, take your pick, we saw riots in major cities all across the United States. But when a group of prominent Democrats, whether it was House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, then Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, or other prominent Democrats, or even, activists masquerading as journalists, right, on like real garbage networks like CNN and MSNBC, well, when we were seeing very visibly BLM activists and Antifa activists marching in the streets, setting buildings on fire, looting businesses, assaulting and even killing some bystanders, and even injuring police officers. Quote, we were told they were mostly peaceful protests. Or remember, for example, when, many liberals and Democrats, for example, or progressives, or who knows what they were seizing several blocks of the Capitol Hill neighborhood in downtown Seattle, declaring it an autonomous zone. Remember that last summer? Remember the guns and deaths and sort of the utter destruction? But we were told by the liberal mayor in Seattle and, of course, the other incompetent liberal governor in the state of Washington, yes, quote, it's a block party atmosphere. Or, for example, remember when a crazed mob gathered after the Republican National Convention and attacked U.S. Senator Rand Paul? Quote, we were told, no justice, no peace. Remember how police were told to stand down and liberal governors, for the most part, across states like New York and New Jersey, Michigan, Pennsylvania, California. Yeah, we were all told that, they refused to call in the National Guard. They were, in many instances, many Democrat activist groups and liberals and progressives alike actually paid the bail for violent protesters who were arrested. But we were told, quote, this is the only way that oppressed people can be heard. Now, listen, folks, I've condemned violent protests and lawlessness every single time it's been reported. I've talked about it on not just this program, but on my other media platforms. And I condemn the actions of those that recently stormed the Capitol building in Washington a few weeks ago. But what I refuse to do is condemn hundreds of thousands of peaceful protesters because a handful 52 specifically, were arrested, and they chose to be lawless, right? And to defy everything that the mass majority of the crowd stood for, right? They were upset. They were upset that in many instances they weren't, they felt that this wasn't a fair election, right? All we heard about was, some of the, discrepancies concerning vote by mail ballots and how that's ripe for voter fraud. Well, it is. Check it out here in New Jersey. You want me to give you examples? Hoboken, Patterson, whatever. Many people were upset. By and large, people were trying to protest quietly and peacefully. And yes, of course, a few bad apples ruined it for everybody else. But isn't that what we heard for years, right? From Democrats and the left? We can't sort of assign, accountability to just a few people and that represents a movement. Well, that sort of selective memory should piss you off, because I know it does for me. Now, I've always been a defender of the Constitution. I've defended the police, and I believe in the rule of law. Now, because a few relative people decided to do something stupid doesn't necessarily nullify the concerns of the many. But you know who the real culprit is, though, here, folks? The liberal mainstream media. Because they've been telling us for years, right, that the violence is the only way that people who are oppressed can be heard. It's the only way to get justice, right? It's sort of, this is what democracy looks like. Well, apparently a few people recently in Washington, D.C. decided to take them up on their advice. Now, of course, listen, the inflammatory rhetoric that we've seen from the left for many, many years now has caused this. And it's about time that the social justice clowns and all the woke fools, not just only in our news feeds, but around the country, along with the liberal mainstream media, actually takes responsibility for dividing Americans. But here's a spoiler alert. Here's something that, may shock you. It doesn't shock me, but it may shock a lot of you. None of them will ever take any responsibility, because they never will. It's not in their nature to ever take responsibility for anything. It's easier to deflect and to blame you, regular, everyday, working class people, because according to them, we're the intolerant ones. According to them, we're the ones incapable of having a conversation and a dialogue. Folks, we all know it's a lie. They're the ones who can't do anything without resorting to perpetual victimhood. That's the blueprint of the left, right? It's what they're good at. Now, of course, it's a shame that media institutions, once again here in New Jersey, like the Star-Ledger and their chief columnist, Tom Moran, or NJTV, with their chief correspondent, David Cruz, don't call this out. They've just become lazy and complacent. For many of them, collecting a paycheck actually is easier than reporting the truth for a lot of New Jerseyans. And we're seeing that not just here in the Garden State, but throughout the country. Take your pick, folks. We have garbage institutions like CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post. You know what? If they actually did their jobs, they'd actually do a credit to journalism. But what they're really doing is an immense disservice. And you know what? We're on to you. And someone like me, I'll continue calling you out, because you know what? Nobody else will. And that's what I'm thinking about right now. On this week's edition of the 4-time award-winning weekly podcast, Talk on the Hudson, which you can listen to live every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. by going to www.blogtalkradio.com/Talk on the Hudson, was the publisher of the Hudson County Chronicles, Bruce Alston. Now, he's been a guest multiple times on the podcast, and I always appreciate his wealth of knowledge concerning the community, and more so his contributions to journalism and activism alike. And here are some highlights for your consideration. First and foremost, we discussed sort of the breaking news that the son of U.S. Senator Robert Menendez Jr., continues to sort of hold Jersey City Mayor Stephen Fulop accountable for many, many things. It's sort of taken to a social media feud, but now his father, the senior United States Senator, seems to be getting involved. Bruce had a lot to say about what this ongoing feud represents for Jersey City residents as there's an election coming up this November. Let's hear what he had to say.
And we know that Mayor Stephen Fulop in Jersey City continues to solidify his ticket. Many will say he looks almost unbeatable going into later this year when he runs for a third term. But there seems to be there's a voice of dissent in Hudson County right now. And that voice is coming from the son of the senior U.S. Senator, Robert Menendez. And Robert Menendez Jr. Seems to be very vocal, not just lately, but he's been vocal for some time. And now, again, it's January. The clock's ticking here. You can't really wait too long if you're going to declare to run for mayor or not. What are you hearing about Robert Jr. And how he's being perceived in Jersey City?
Well, that's my whole argument. My whole thing is that from what I hear, he's a bright young man. It seems. I mean, it seems that he does have some political ambitions. But what I'll say to you right now, are we having this discussion about Robert Menendez Jr. if his name was Robert Alston Jr.? You know, I mean, and that's something that, you know, I'm on the ground. I've been on the ground for years. I've been on the ground, and when I get people that are activists that are more on the ground than me, but know that I know the history, and they start calling me and asking me, hey, who's this Robert Menendez Jr.? That's a problem. That's a problem for him, I think, because it shows me he's really not in touch with the community if he's really just going on and meeting people now. They should already know you. They should already know you if you plan on running for mayor of Jersey City. And I don't see how you've been a resident since 2018, and I see that he's been a resident of Hudson County, born and raised, just like you, just like me. But what I can't say to you, and I will tell you this, if I popped in and said I'm going to run for mayor of Union City, and I just lived there for 2 years, I think everybody would be looking at me like I was crazy. You know, I mean, there's a difference of being born and raised in Jersey City as opposed to being born and raised in Hudson. Now, I think that, personally, I think that the young man's bright guy, speaks very well. But what bothers me is that knowing some of the backstory of the history between the Menendez family and Mayor Fulop, is this a personal vendetta? Is this a political vendetta campaign? Because your father's endorsed this young man in the past. So it really alarms me when I see stuff like that, because I'm like, is he really running to better Jersey City? Or is it really for some type of, you know, well, this guy wanted to run for my father's seat? And what bothers me is when we talk about these seats, the mayor's seat is not Stephen Fulop's seat, just like the Senate seat is not Senator Menendez's seat. It's the people's seat, you know? And when I start hearing people referring to those seats like they own them, that worries me. That worries me tremendously, you know? And my antennas really go out, because I'm going to tell you, going back to the Glenn Cunningham years, the Menendez family doesn't have a great reputation with the African-American community historically in Jersey City. They just don't. I mean, there was some very loud accusations that was laid out against Senator Menendez when Glenn Cunningham was mayor about systemic racism, about privilege, about bossism and everything, you know. And you know, I laughed when I read the barbs going between him and Fulop. The first thing I said was, if I'm Congressman Frank Guarini, I'm giving the side eye at Bob Menendez, like, hey, dude, you came after my congressional seat. So like, it's the game of thorns, you know. It's the game of thorns, and I think that a young man like Menendez, he does have a political future. I mean, it does mean something to have name recognition, but I just think he needs maybe a little bit more seasoning before he says, hey, I'm just going to run for mayor of Jersey City, which arguably is going to be the largest city in the state without having any type of elected office experience. Not saying it's something down the line, but I would love to see the young man take a council seat, do something with that. I think that he could bring some things that maybe that could bring some voice, but I don't see it as being the mayor of Jersey City at this point. I really don't.
Without question, Robert Menendez Jr. has the backup of his dad, and that's serious political capital. Whether or not it translates into Robert Menendez Jr. jumping into the race remains to be seen. With 11 months to go, time is running short, and we'll see what his campaign, if there is one to materialize, will be doing in the coming weeks and months ahead, as I'm sure filing deadlines are quickly approaching. Secondly, we talked about the recent endorsement of U.S. Representative Albio Sires for Jersey City Mayor Stephen Fulop. Let me just put this into context, because as we all know, there was some bad blood for many years now, going back to the spring of 2018, when Jersey City Mayor Stephen Fulop decided to attempt a coup of Hudson County Executive Tom DeGise, a very good lifelong friend of the representative in Congress. But of course, that sort of ongoing animosity has cooled down as Albio Sires recently endorsed the mayor of Hudson County's largest city. Bruce had a lot to say about what this endorsement means moving forward. Let's hear what he had to say.
I keep hearing the fact that, you know, it was interesting to see Representative Sears come out and endorse Fulop when, there was still some bad blood there for some time. I know going back to, what Fulop attempted to do in 2018 to Tom DeGise, and I know that Alvio Sears and Tom DeGise have a very good relationship, very good rapport. That didn't flow with Sears. Apparently, it seems like Fulop has really smoothed out that animosity that apparently existed between Tom DeGise and Alvio Sears. Apparently, he hasn't repaired it yet with Menendez, and I don't know if that ever will get fixed. Are you hearing the same things?
Yeah, but I'm hearing the same things, but I'm also hearing more of the same that people. I mean, from a if I'm Alvio Series and different people like this, hey, listen, this is not the time to for Senator Menendez and Stephen Fulop basically to get into a fight when the country has been so divided, and we've seen what happens what's happened with the divided Republican Party over the last few weeks, right? So now locally, right, we're going into a gubernatorial year, right, and we're going into a mayor's election, and we're going to fight over the mayor of Jersey City, who has high favorables, who's 10 months away from election. There's no announced opposition. He's able to self-finance. He has about $900,000 in his bank, $300,000 in his team account, and a PAC that's sitting around with $2 or $3 million. I think a guy like Alvio said, hey, listen, it's a no-brainer to not endorse him because, I mean, you got to build out at least 2 years, You got to build out at least 2 years to run for this. It's a big job now, and I think that he probably said, you know what? Hey, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go ahead and endorse him. Now, we always know that there's always some backroom dealing and stuff like that, but I mean, as close as Alvio is to the Menendez family, right? The first thing I thought about was two things. I thought that Senator Menendez came out that strongly against the mayor because, one, he was caught off guard by Alvio, and maybe he was caught off guard by Amy DeGise announcing that she was going to run on his ticket and he wasn't consulted.
Yeah.
And that's my thinking, because when you really look at it, the statement, right? It came out and there's no backstory why a response needed to be, why those words were even said. You know what I mean? No. So I think it was more of like, hey, you know what? I'm not being involved. I'm not being consulted with. And in all fairness, though, I mean, Senator Menendez, you're a U.S. senator now. I mean, being involved in local county politics, I think what that kind of did, to be honest with you, it might have kind of hurt Bob Jr. And this is the reason why I say that, right? That if you were thinking about running, it's letting people know that your father has a personal vendetta and the family has a personal animosity towards the current mayor, and maybe that's what's propelling your campaign. You see what I'm saying, Fernando? So it kind of maybe hurts his candidacy in some ways, So my thing was this, though. I think that this is two things you got to look at it. It'll be an uphill fight for Menendez Jr. to defeat Fulop. Do I think the betting person or people around politically, okay, he runs his shot, he gets name recognition, he runs again in 4 years. But this is the nuclear bomb that you have to worry about, right? If I'm Stephen Fulop, I've already said I'm not going to run for a fourth term, I'm going to run for a third term. You know what? You run against me and I beat you. You know what? I'm running against your father in 2024.
It was a very interesting episode overall, and we talked for well over 60 minutes about these issues and much more concerning Jersey City and, of course, how it affects the political climate in Hudson County overall. And you can listen to the episode in its entirety by going to www.blogtalkradio.com/talkinthehudson. You can listen to the episode anywhere at any time from any PC, Mac, smartphone, or tablet. And these are the exclusives I'll continue to bring you here in 2021. And now to some local stories for your consideration. Let's keep it in Jersey City. And again, a shout out to John Hyannis with the Hudson County View for his excellent reporting on this story. Now, it seems that a 2004 loss against Menendez actually kickstarted Stephen Phillip's career in Jersey City. But will there be a part two? Now, while Stephen Phillip's first election in 2004 ended with a definitive loss to then U.S. Representative Bob Menendez out of the 13th Congressional District, it helped jumpstart his career in Jersey City. Now, is a part two of sorts on the horizon with Robert Menendez Jr. considering a run for mayor in 2021. Now, Menendez, currently New Jersey's senior United States Senator, serves as the chair of the Hudson County Democratic Organization's campaign heading into, again, that 2004 reelection campaign. The Jersey City mayor at the time was Glenn Cunningham, who was no fan of Senator Robert Menendez and had lobbied bold accusations against the then congressman alleging voter suppression tactics back at a July 23rd, 2003 rally, which again has been detailed on other media outlets in Hudson County. According to Cunningham at the time, quote, "Something is wrong with our Democratic leadership here when one of the most powerful Democratic elected officials in the nation, Congressman Bob Menendez, uses his influence to prevent the express voting will of the people of Jersey City to be thrown away like garbage on the street." Also, a state senator of the 31st Legislative District at the time, Cunningham wasn't willing to let Menendez high step into the end zone, nor was he going to risk losing valuable political capital. Historically, though, it's unheard of in New Jersey, particularly in Hudson County, to support a candidate that has essentially no chance against a strong incumbent simply to send a message. Of course, enter Stephen Phillip, a U.S. Marine who had just returned home from Iraq, enlisting shortly after the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, and had quickly become a Cunningham protege. Despite having no political experience, though, Phillip decided to give it an old college try, and likely out of respect for his mentor more than anything else. Again, the end result was never in doubt, as evidenced by Phillip raising just $15,000 to Menendez's eye-popping $3.4 million, according to 2004 filings with the Federal Election Commission. Now, Menendez won the June 8, 2004 Democratic primary in a landslide of 34,807 votes to Phillip's 5,099 votes, for a margin approximately of 87% to 13% according to the FEC. Sadly, Cunningham passed before the primary, dying suddenly of a heart attack on May 25, 2004. Now, while the chips were way down, though, Stephen Phillip managed to mount a successful, unofficial, off-the-line challenge the following May against incumbent Ward Councilman Junior Maldonado, the current Hudson County clerk, in a nonpartisan contest. Now, Maldonado enjoyed the support of Menendez, the ACDO, and at the time, Jersey City Mayor Jeremiah Healy. But that somehow wasn't enough to stave off Phillip, who won by nearly 10 percentage points, though that translated to less than 400 votes, approximately 2,165 to 1,802, according to records. Long story short, Stephen Phillip won a second term on the city council and has won 2 terms as mayor, and also before possibly a run for governor, before ultimately backing Phil Murphy in the past decade and a half, the latter of which has really strained his relationship with the senior United States senator. Well, folks, listen, this is what's really at stake here. Will Senator Bob Menendez encourage his son to run for mayor? We all know that Robert Menendez Jr. has been very vocal about what's going wrong in Jersey City. And while Mayor Stephen Phillip has a lot of favorables, there's still pockets of the city that find him less desirable. Whether or not Robert Menendez Jr. can capitalize on this sort of dislike for Stephen Phillip remains to be seen. Time's running short, though, as we are in mid-January. And as we all know, while the election's 11 months away, it might seem like a lifetime, it really isn't. Whether or not Robert Menendez Jr. can establish some sort of infrastructure and ground game in these coming months remains to be seen. But you can't doubt him, because you know what? He comes from a strong family of political fighters. And if anything we've learned about his father, U.S. Senator Robert Menendez Sr., is the fact that, hey, he'll get in the trenches, he'll roll up his sleeves, and he'll go campaign. That's something that you can tell his son definitely will inherit. And if Robert Menendez Jr. decides to run, he becomes a very formidable opponent and even a possible headache for Stephen Phillip in November of 2021. Another local story in Jersey City to keep an eye on, again, great job by John Hayes with Hudson County View for his report on this story, is that 7 Jersey City Democratic Organization members, along with a progressive group, have asked Amy DeGise, as well as Ms. Stamato, not to fund Richard Borgiano's reelection. Now, 7 members of the Jersey City Democratic Organization, along with the Hudson County Progressive Alliance, and we all know what a pain in the ass those people are asking 2 local Democratic leaders not to fund the reelection of Ward C Councilman Richard Borgiano after he abstained on a resolution denouncing the January 6th insurrection which happened recently. Quote, last Wednesday, Jersey City Councilman Richard Borgiano was the only council member to abstain on a resolution condemning these attacks and calling for the impeachment of President Donald Trump, a letter that was sent to Jersey City Democratic Organization Chair Barbara Stamato and Hudson County Democratic Organization Chairwoman Amy DeGise. Quote, in his statement on the vote, he said that he feels Jersey City Council has no place condemning the president. This is wrong. Threat on democracy at the national level is a threat on democracy at every level of government. This builds on his career that has included introducing right-wing conspiracy theories at council meetings, standing against police accountability, and aligning himself with the All Lives Matter racial grievance movement. And the letter was signed by Kevin Bing, Mark Devins, Ayanna De Novelis, Kurt Sauer, Ryan Moser, Rachel O'Brien, and Alan Villers. At a recent council meeting, Borgiano said that, quote, he was dead against what happened in Washington, but felt that the resolution, which specifically condemned the Capitol Hill riots and called for President Trump's impeachment, was beyond the council's purview. I think it was a disgrace and disgusting, but I don't feel we as a council have a right, whether it's Bush 1, Bush 2, Obama, Clinton, or any president, have a right to include something like that in a resolution. That's why I'm abstaining, he said at the time. The measure passed 8-0, with the one, of course, abstaining was Richard Borgiano, as the rest of his colleagues voted yes. Folks, listen, I think the councilman's right here. I think that what we're seeing, whether it's putting pressure on the Jersey City Democratic Organization or the Hudson County Democratic Organization by these, progressive groups, which are always a pain in the ass. If they're not bitching and moaning about the ICE contract, they're bitching and moaning about defunding the police. But guess what? When their house gets broken into, if they're living in a really crappy area of Jersey City, who are they going to call? A social worker or the Ghostbusters? I didn't think so. But again, it's what makes a lot of these progressive organizations absolutely insufferable. And of course, why should you be surprised that they're trying to take out a career, an honorable civil servant like Richard Borgiano, and now an honorable member of the Jersey City Council. Folks, it never surprises me about these social justice clowns and these woke fools who find a reason every single day to complain about something. It's like they live to bitch and moan, right? It's like bitching and moaning is living for them. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of them. Listen, get on to more important things in Jersey City, like the violence on the South Side or worrying about developments. Don't worry about what Richard Borgiano's doing and whether or not he's abstaining from something that doesn't suit you. Again, folks, it's activists really, being children. And again, they're masquerading as someone that, quite frankly, when they come around, whether it's on social media or in print media, yes, they feel that their heart's in the right place. But quite frankly, folks, their head's really up their ass. And it shows here, and yet just another example about why progressive groups like this are absolutely insufferable. And quite frankly, you know what? They do no good to the community. And here's just yet another example. And that's our show for this week. To check out all the excellent programming brought to you by the leader in independent media here in Hudson County, the Hudson Media Group, please go to their website. It's www.hmgtvshows.com and www.livestream.com/HMGTV. Don't forget to like the Hudson Media Group on Facebook and follow them on both Instagram and Twitter. And remember, live every Wednesday night at 9 p.m., you can listen to the 4-time award-winning podcast, Talking Hudson, by going to www.blogtalkradio.com/Talking the Hudson. Don't forget to like Talking Hudson on Facebook and, of course, follow it on Instagram. And never forget, ladies and gentlemen, if it's unbiased, unfiltered, and unafraid, it's always talking politics right here with the Hudson Media Group. This is your favorite professor and broadcast journalist, Fernando Uribe, saying so long and have a great week. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Don't forget to catch Fernando's podcast at blogtalkradio.com/talkonthehudson. New episodes available every Wednesday night at 9 p.m.